I want to talk about the whole picture. I'll be very quick, and you're going to hear from Commissioner Shea as well. Most important thing always is to protect the lives of all New Yorkers. There was a lot of activity around the 5 boroughs yesterday, well into the night. The bottom line, the most important thing, thank God, is that lives were protected. No loss of life last night or obviously in the nights before and the days before in these protests. As much as we know at this moment, no serious injury, one incident being looked at, but generally speaking, no serious injury to protesters or to officers. There are many things to discuss, and we will. Things that must be addressed, things that need to be done better, both in terms of our immediate work addressing this situation and certainly in our work going forward. Much that has to be done and much that has to change and that we will change. But I want to note that overall, even in a day where thousands of people were out expressing their views, expressing their frustration, their pain, their anger, their deep desire for change, in locations all over the city, overall what we saw was overwhelmingly peaceful demonstration. I'm definitely going to address some of the things we saw late in the evening that were not peaceful and not acceptable. But if you talk about the reality of the full day, we saw more and more the peaceful demonstrators coming to the fore and establishing a different tone, a different reality. People who are from communities, want change, want it done the right way, the peaceful way, the democratic way. And that was more and more evident yesterday than in the last few days. I spoke to yesterday a number of community leaders. I was out in central Brooklyn, talked to elected officials, also talked to community residents. What I heard overwhelmingly was a desire to keep things peaceful, to work on change in a positive constructive fashion. I heard both with my own ears, saw with my own eyes, community members saying, we are going to set the tone for any protest, not folks who are not from our community, not folks who want to do violence. We, the community members, the community leaders, will set the tone. Saw this, heard about the specifics of it in central Brooklyn, heard examples from Harlem, from Southeast Queens, of elected officials, clergy, community leaders, civic leaders, Cure Violence movement members and leaders stepping in and setting a different tone. And I think that's very, very important. So I want to commend and thank all of the community leaders, all the community members who have said it is up to the community to determine how this will go and to ensure that change is made the right way. Thank you, and it's crucial that that good work continue. I also want to say there's some issues to discuss for sure, and certain specific situations involving the NYPD that I will discuss that need to be addressed. But overall, our officers showed restraint throughout the day and evening yesterday. Overall, the peaceful protest was handled the way we want it to be handled, with officers staying back and protest allowed to continue in the tradition of this city. In fact, we saw in many cases police leaders and police officers engage protesters, engage community leaders, have a real discussion with them, show empathy, show connection. This is what neighborhood policing is about. And we saw powerful examples of it. There's a video out there. Chief Fausto Pichardo, Chief of Patrol of the NYPD, one of the highest ranking members of the NYPD, proud member of our Dominican community, out there talking face to face with a protest leader saying, we want to keep this peaceful, we want this to be done the right way, we want everyone to be able to express their views the right way. There's the images out there of Chief Della Torre, Chief Madry in Brooklyn, taking a knee, respecting the concerns of the protesters, saying we can work together. There's this very powerful image. I want to thank the Daily News for putting this on the front cover today. Deputy Inspector Vincent Tavallero in Queens showing that the NYPD is listening, working with the community. This kind of thing, our police leadership reaching out, connecting with the community. This is the entire concept of neighborhood policing, and that's true in the middle of this difficult moment. In fact, is how we're going to overcome this moment and move forward. So I commend and I thank all the police leaders who found a way to reach out, listen, connect, and the restraint of so many of our officers. Now, there are things that have to be addressed. Later in the evening last night, in several locations, particularly Lower Manhattan, we saw looting. That is something we do not see typically in this city. That is unacceptable in New York City. It will not be allowed in New York City. We're going to address that very, very aggressively. Again, that phenomenon, rare, and we saw it for the first time in any serious manner last night, did not see that in the other nights. That is being fomented by a very small number of violent protesters. That is not what everyday community people are doing. I want to be very clear about that. And that is also why I am confident in the NYPD's ability to locate those individuals and deal with this problem. We also have seen situations where police officers acted inappropriately. And it's rare, I want to be clear, but it must be addressed in every instance. Now, I want to take a step back and talk about a very troubling video from the night before last of two police cars moving through an intersection, moving through a crowd that was so troubling to the people of this city. And I spoke to it, and I spoke from the heart about what I saw, but what I also knew had been happening in that day and the day before, including very dangerous situations where the lives of our officers were in danger. And I tried to express that reality while also saying it's not acceptable for a police car to ever move through a crowd. I don't think I expressed it as well as I should have, so I want to try again to help the people of this city understand. There is no situation where a police vehicle should drive into a crowd of protesters or New Yorkers of any kind. It is dangerous, it is unacceptable. This was an extremely aberrant situation. And there were extenuating circumstances, I believe, because of incidents that had happened earlier. And I understand why the danger that there could have been a much bigger conflict there was looming. But it is still not acceptable for our officers to ever drive into a crowd. This incident is under investigation as we speak, both within the NYPD and by the independent review that I have set up with our Corporation Counsel and our Department of Investigation Commissioner. There's going to be, in each and every instance where an officer did something wrong, and we've all seen the video of an officer pushing a young woman to the ground. We've seen the video of an officer opening a car door and hitting a protester. All of these matters are under review right now. They need to be speedy reviews. Discipline must be meted out in any case where it is merited. We need to show the people of this city that there's one standard that, and I got this when I've talked to community leaders and community members, this is the nagging, deep complaint, this sense of double standard, and it can't go on. Vast majority of officers do their job well. The vast majority of officers are trying to connect to communities and do the right thing. They're in this job for the right reason. There are some who do not belong on this job. And there are some that use violence when they shouldn't. There are some that are disrespectful to the people they serve. There are some that harbor racism in their hearts. These people should not be in the police force, and it's our job to get them out. So any situation where an officer does something, even in the context of a protest and a tense situation, they do something offensive and inappropriate, there must be immediate investigation, there must be the appropriate penalty, and that penalty can include all the way up to being removed from the police force. There's a video going around of a police officer in the middle of a situation that admittedly looked chaotic, but where protesters were in front of that police officer drew his gun at some point yesterday. That, to me, seeing that video was absolutely unacceptable. Now, I don't know all the circumstances, and we must know all the facts. There will be an immediate full investigation of that incident. But I can say, as a New Yorker, as your mayor, as someone who understands that the vast majority of protesters are there peacefully, and even those who do have that violent intent, are still human beings. We have to always know it is not the place of an officer to pull a gun in the middle of a crowd, knowing that there are peaceful protesters in that crowd. That is unacceptable, that is dangerous. And I want you to note on that video how a superior officer immediately came over and moved that officer away from that crowd. That officer should have his gun and badge taken away today. There will be an investigation immediately to determine the larger consequences. So this, to me, makes clear, as we've known that the work of reform has been going on for years, but must deepen. People are demanding more change, and they have every right to, because they're in pain. They feel an injustice is being done to them every single day. I've talked the last few days about what racism means in people's everyday lives. For so many people, in so many communities of color, and this particularly afflicts people of African descent, racism hangs like a cloud every hour of every day, and if their assumption is in their encounters with a police officer that they will not be given fair and equal treatment, that's an unacceptable state of affairs. So how do we change it? In addition to neighborhood policing and body cameras and all the other things that we've tried to do to change policing, what more can we do? Here's what we could do immediately. The legislature right now could repeal the 50A legislation, the 50A law that is holding back transparency in police discipline. I have called for this. My police commissioners have called for this. The governor has come out and said he is ready to sign a repeal bill. We need 50A repealed. Let's do that in the month of June. This would be one of the single most important things that we could do to increase trust between police and community. I've been very clear. We must also have legislation that protects the identities of police officers in their personal life, their home address. They deserve that protection. But discipline processes must be transparent. We have a moment now that we can get that done, and that will deepen the trust and deepen our ability to have progress going forward. What else do we have to do? There has to be a faster discipline process. Anytime an officer is alleged to have done something inappropriate, there needs to be an immediate investigation, immediate consequences. It always takes too long. It makes people so frustrated and so angry. We can't accept that state of affairs. We have to change. If we have an instance where an officer has done something inappropriate, there needs to be an immediate investigation, consequences quickly. If that officer should not be on the police force, we should remove that officer. If an officer is not right for a community, if an officer has shown that they are unable to work appropriately on the street and with a community, they should be removed from work on the street. If an officer should not be on the police force, they should be removed from the police force. We've done a whole host of other reforms, and they have changed policing in the city. But it's time to go to the next level, and we have to go there quickly. Because any officer who should not be wearing that uniform needs to get off this force. And we have to have a way of doing that. So the other officers, the vast majority who are doing their job, respecting communities, honoring the law, serving people, putting their lives on the line, that vast majority of good officers, let their work shine through when we get the bad apples off this police force. My final point before turning to Commissioner Shea. As has been reported, my daughter Kiara was arrested at a protest. I want you first to know, and I think many, many parents can appreciate this, she's 25 years old and did not inform Shirlane and I of her intention to get arrested. I knew of some of her views. I knew she believed in peaceful protest. I knew she had participated a few nights ago, but in a peaceful manner. And when I found out she had been arrested, finally reached her with Shirlane, and we asked her to recount the whole story. And look, I love my daughter deeply. I honor her. She is such a good human being. She only wants to do good in the world. She wants to see a better and more peaceful world. She believes a lot of change is needed. I'm proud of her that she cares so much and she was willing to go out there and do something about it. She recounted the story in detail to me. She was acting peacefully. She believes that everything she did was in the spirit of peaceful, respectful protest. And the bottom line is I will let her speak for herself in any way that she wants to. But I admire that she was out there trying to change something that she thought was unjust and doing it in a peaceful manner. It's a reality that every parent faces, that you never know when your kids become adults how they're going to go about their lives. Sometimes you get surprises. But even though this was a surprise to Shirlane and I respect my daughter, I honor her, and I know her heart. I know she appreciates humanity, every kind of humanity. She appreciates the fact that people serve us. She appreciates the fact that we need to change this world, and she, in her own way, has tried to do something about it. And for that, I want to just tell her how much I love and respect and admire her. With that, I turn to Commissioner Shea.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So yesterday, over the course of the day, we encountered a number of protests throughout New York City. Large crowds were taking part in the protests. They were overwhelmingly peaceful throughout the day. They were concentrated in Brooklyn, Manhattan, and to a smaller degree in Queens. But again, the largest concentrations were in and around the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, and then in the area around Union Square, 14th Street in Manhattan. The Manhattan one was a little more mobile. Throughout the day, as I said, overwhelmingly peaceful protests. I think there was a different, less tension in the air from my perspective and the reports that we were getting back throughout the day. That changed as the nighttime came. What we saw was a marked shift about probably 8:30, 9 p.m. As many protesters were leaving for the day, we started to see some criminal activity concentrated more in Manhattan than other areas, and that's some of the looting that was recounted. We're still tallying up the totals in terms of arrests, injuries, or things of that sort. As the mayor said, we start with the most important thing, loss of life. We did have some dangerous incidents in New York City yesterday attributed to the protests, but thankfully there was no lost life. I thank the officers and the protesters, community leaders that came out again. I think this is an ongoing process. We're in day 4. We expect more protests throughout the city today. And I will tell you that the men and women of this police department will be consistent. They will be out there again, ensuring the rights of people to peacefully assemble. And we ask all New Yorkers to participate and do it safely.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Let's take some questions from the media, and please let me know the name and the outlet of each journalist.
We'll now begin our Q&A. The first question today goes to Jen Peltz from the AP.
Hi, Mr. Mayor. How are you?
Good, Jen. How you doing?
Fine, thanks. I wanted to ask whether you are considering a curfew, and if not, whether you're considering any other steps other than what has been done in the previous nights.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. A central question. I appreciate it. To date, we have not believed a curfew is the right strategy, but the commissioner and I are going to talk about it as an option today. We'll discuss it over the next few hours. I'm also going to have a discussion with Governor Cuomo about it. We have to look at it as an option, but that being said, we have not made a decision. There are advantages and disadvantages, to say the least, to instituting a curfew. Previous nights, I think, were different than what we saw last night, so we're weighing that right now. In terms of the strategies that will be in effect tonight, I'll let the commissioner speak to it, but I can say, having gone all over the areas where there were protests last night, I saw a huge number of NYPD officers, which I think is essential to keeping the peace where there is this kind of attempt at looting. So we have a lot of officers ready to go. I think a lot became clear from last night about how to strategically approach this situation. I feel tremendous confidence the NYPD will know how to deal with it. Commissioner, you want to go into any further?
Thank you. I was out there last night throughout the city, saw firsthand some of the activities. What a good day that turned bad, unfortunately, and I think it leaves a black mark on everything that's trying to be accomplished. Again, I made the reference yesterday, and I think it's appropriate. It's hijacking a cause, and you had such good stories coming out, whether it's the cover of today's Daily News or other stories. You saw a lot on social media of all different ranks, not always agreeing, but agreeing to see and hear each other and listen to each other, and knowing that it's a long journey to get to where we want to be, to working together, to denounce when we see something wrong. That changed last night with the looting. We have to recognize that that is where the protest ended. There was no agenda for a protest last night as breaking into stores and stealing property. We will have a robust amount of officers, both in plainclothes and uniform, out there tonight. Anyone coming to, whether it's one of the outer boroughs or to Manhattan, with the intent to take advantage of people during this very difficult time, we are going to ensure that we do everything that you are prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. If we see you driving a car into Manhattan and using it to facilitate that crime, you are going to lose your car. So I encourage everyone, again, come out, protest, make yourself heard, enact change. But we will have little tolerance for criminal activity. The one thing I will say is I saw increased, again, numbers last night of New Yorkers, of every faith, of every religion, of every ethnicity, speaking out against it, that they are not speaking for us. I saw many incidents where I was, quite frankly, a little worried that it was going to turn to violence, where people confronting people that are breaking windows on stores, saying that doesn't help us. I saw doormen, I saw residents coming down trying to aid, and I think that we are a significant part of this story, the NYPD and law enforcement, but it's a groundswell that's going to really end this terrible situation that we're in the middle of now. And we encourage all New Yorkers to speak up, speak your cause, whether you agree or disagree, but do it peacefully and work with us.
Thank you.
The next is Dave Evans from ABC.
Hi, Mayor. I wanted to ask you a couple of things, and forgive me if you addressed this at the very beginning because I was doing an interview right as you began talking. So
Dave? We seem to have a problem with Dave's audio 2 days in a row. Dave, are you there?
Dave, do we have you
fine.
here?
Do you hear me?
Yeah, try again. Start. No, you said you didn't hear the beginning of the press conference. So what is your question, Dave? Okay, Dave needs a new cell phone. This is what we're learning from the last 2 days. Dave, last call, Dave.
We're in Lower Manhattan. It's a dead zone. I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to ask you if you could address some of the criticism of you and the police department that you have been too pro-police the last couple of days to defuse. I also wanted to ask
Dave, you got to get to a better cell zone, so I'll take the first part, and if we can get him back, we'll get the rest of his question. Last call, Dave. Can you hear me? Okay.
Go ahead.
Dave, last call. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Stay still, Dave. What is the rest of your question?
I just wanted to see if you thought Kiara had done anything wrong last night.
No. Dave, look, I trust my daughter. I've known her whole life. She is an incredibly good human being. She just cares for other people. I've seen this throughout her whole life. Anybody who was hurting in her life, she would try to help. She was always looking out for the underdog. She was always looking out for the person who wasn't heard. She's just a very good human. Did a lot to try and help people in lots of ways. She's also been an activist for years in lots of different ways. This is not someone who would ever commit any violence, and she recounted in tremendous detail to Charlene and I what happened. And she was very clear that she believed she was following the instructions of police officers and doing what they were asking. So again, I'm going to let her speak for herself about the details, but absolutely, she was abundantly clear. She was peacefully protesting, not doing anything that would provoke a negative response. And the criticisms, Dave, look, I have spent the entire time in my public life trying to bring change to the relationship between police and community. And I know we have done something very different in this city in the last 6.5 years. I know neighborhood policing alone, and it's just begun, is going to create a transcendent reality where police and community come together. When you look at this, I'm going to show it again because I think it is so powerful. This didn't happen in previous administrations. It just didn't. Let's be very real about that. This is because neighborhood policing says, find a way to connect with communities and work with communities and hear and see them, as Commissioner Shea just said. And you didn't used to have, Dave, a lot of police commissioners sitting here talking about hearing and seeing communities. We are making profound change, but we got to do a lot more. So what I have said these last days is we, the elected officials, the police leadership, we must change more. It is on us to do that. But I'm also going to express my respect for the vast majority of police officers who are doing their job out there. It's very tough circumstances the last few days. They've shown a lot of restraint. I'm always going to respect that. But any officer does the wrong thing, there need to be consequences, and they need to be fast. And we need to show, we need not to talk about it, we need to show it. So communities, we need to see action. That's what people will believe in.
The next is Jeff Mays from the New York Times.
Hey, good morning, Mr. Mayor. I have two questions. The first one is from my colleague, Ashley Southall. Yesterday, the police counterterrorism commissioner said that investigators knew ahead of the protest that interlopers were planning to use the protest as a foil for violence. But he said the police did not share that information with the public because they feared being seen as trying to sabotage the protest. Do you think it was the right decision not to put the public on heightened alert? And then my second question is regarding your daughter's arrest. Do you think the SBA or any other police entity violated any privacy rules when they released news of that arrest? Will there be any investigation into that incident? And should you have informed the public yesterday that your daughter was arrested? Why did you wait a whole day to let the public know?
Jeff, I respect you greatly. I respect your news organization. I'm smiling and laughing because I think you misunderstand. If I had known that my daughter was arrested, I would have been the first to let the public know. I found out when my staff got a media inquiry, which gets back to your point about the fact that information was leaked. I have a 25-year-old adult daughter who lives her own life, chooses to share information with me if she deems to, but not something that's a guarantee when you're dealing with an adult child. So I knew that she had been out peacefully protesting on Thursday night. She had given me her sense of what she was seeing and her critique of things. Never heard from her after that she was involved in anything. I found out, the only reason I found out she had been arrested was there was a media inquiry that then I heard about from my staff. I reached out to her immediately and said, where are you? What's going on? I didn't even know if it meant in real time or it happened previously. And finally, she called back, and Charlene and I got in line with her, and she went through exactly what happened. We did not know that it had happened the night before, and she told us about the experience. So no, actually this is a case, and this is the whole truth and nothing but the truth. The media knew about this before I knew about it. No, of course not. The SBA did something unconscionable, and it's not just because it's my daughter. They do this all the time with people's privacy. This is another one of the things that has to change. Look, police unions could be part of the change and the improvement in this city and in this country. They really should reevaluate what they are doing at this moment in history. More and more police officers are speaking up around America and saying that this is an unacceptable state of affairs. It has to change. Every time a police officer comes forward and says, I want to be part of the change, it is helping us move forward. The unions could play an incredibly positive role if they would just step forward and say, we're ready to be part of that constructive change. But when they leak information on someone, it's absolutely inappropriate. But I'm not going to tell you that it's only happening to my child. It's happening to people every single day. All the things you often report about, all of you, come from leaked information within the NYPD that's not supposed to be leaked. So I don't want to see anything done more than would be done for anyone else. But I wish the whole phenomenon would stop. I don't think it's fair that people in law enforcement inappropriately provide information that's not supposed to be public on individuals, but they do it every hour of every day, and you all report it every hour of every day, so there's a little bit of a contradiction. And then on the question of alerting the public, Jeff, I think it's a very fair question, but I believe that in my comments, the commissioners, we've been saying for days now, that we see a violent element, including a violent element from outside the city and outside the communities where the protests are happening, attempting to use the cover of those who are there to peacefully protest to try and foment acts of violence. We've seen acts of violence. We've seen it in this city. We've seen it in cities all over America. It's a very clear pattern. I think we've made that statement very clearly to people. I think it's a very fair question to say going forward, if we see something very specific that we think might be a particular danger to folks coming to it, we need to alert them. I agree with that entirely. But I feel like we did try to say to people, maybe we need to say it more sharply, that there is an element out there that aims to do violence. They will be out there again today. Again, I'm hearing from mayors all over the country the exact same pattern we're seeing here. Vast majority of protesters are peaceful, small group, going in the midst of the peaceful protesters, using them as a shield, and then trying to attack officers or trying to attack property. And more people are fighting back, Jeff. Look, I'm telling you, I heard from Southeast Queens, Harlem, Central Brooklyn, community leaders, elected officials, clergy, Cure Violence saying, no, we're going to do this peacefully. We do not want people trying to create violence in our communities. If you're going to do that, you need to get out of a protest in our community. And a lot of times the protesters who were there to do violence left because the peaceful protesters, the community-based protesters, took over the situation. Or like what Commissioner Shea said about some of the looting last night, where community members came out and were confronting those who were looting. So there are a very small number of people doing this violence, very small. We have to get them, we have to stop them, but more and more I think the answer will be community members stepping forward and saying, we will not accept this.
The next is Nolan from the Post.
Nolan? What is going on with cell phones today? Nolan, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me, Mr. Mayor?
There you go. How you doing?
I'm all right. It was quite a weekend, and I'm not really sure to begin with all the questions. But maybe let's start here. Things, just by the recounting offered by your own office, it seems like you arrived in Brooklyn at Barclays Center Saturday night. Sunday night it was on Flatbush, and then well, I guess it was Friday night, Saturday night. Sorry, the days have all blurred together. But I guess basically the premise of the question is, you seem to always come to Brooklyn after things had gotten out of hand. Wondering why we're
No, and repeat that last. Your conclusion was what?
All right. The conclusion was. So this is. I have two questions. So if you'll bear with me. First question is, it seemed like on Saturday and Sunday, Friday night, Saturday night, and Sunday, you got to Brooklyn after things had gotten out of hand. In Flatbush, at Barclays Center, on all three of those nights. So my first question is, I'm curious, why weren't you out during the day with the protesters, talking to the protesters, trying to emulate what John Lindsay did in '68 to keep the city calm, as an example? And my second question is to touch on your daughter's experience. I walked with the protesters from Barclays across the Manhattan Bridge last night. And when they arrived on Canal Street, they faced a wall of cops wearing riot gear, carrying nightsticks. The crowd was subsequently divided up into sort of a series of smaller protests, some of which did grow violent.
Nolan, what is your question, my friend? What's your question?
No, I gave you one question, Mr. Mayor, one of which was, why weren't you out?
The first one. What's your second one? What's your second?
The second question is, I wonder if everything that I've seen Saturday night and Sunday night doesn't meet sort of a common English definition of de-escalation, doesn't sort of meet a common English definition of what you would think community policing has looked like. I wonder if you think the police in these instances have been too aggressive.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
Wonder that, and to finish the question, Mr. Mayor.
It's a long question, Nolan. Come on, brother.
Mr. Mayor, it was a very serious weekend. I'm trying to
Nolan,
ask
I
questions
respect
that
it.
get to the gravity
Just
of what
give
happened.
me a question I can answer. Go ahead.
I'm wondering if the police tactics of splitting these large protests, which are fairly good at self-policing, into several smaller groups, hasn't helped to fuel some of this violence.
Okay. Good questions. I appreciate them. Well, obviously, these are questions that I ask all the time, the commissioner's asking, we're talking. The commissioner and I talked yesterday.
Yeah.
I'm not making it up. I think about 30 or 40 times in the course of the day. We are asking these questions constantly. If we were dealing with traditional peaceful protest, everything would have been different. And we want to deal with traditional peaceful protest. And my hope, Nolan, is that more and more that is what's going to happen. I mean, look, people have made a very powerful point, but what we need is for the community to speak more and more. And that's what we're seeing. Elected officials are speaking out, clergy. That is the essence of how we're going to make change. And peaceful protest is what has worked, and violent protest only comes with horrible unintended consequences, and it's the wrong thing to do unto itself. So the reason you saw a mix of different approaches is because you did have violent protesters mixed in, and that has been shown time and time again in these last days and all over the country. If we were dealing with, the commissioner and I have talked about this, I've been in a lot of protests as a protester. I've been there as an elected official. Commissioner has been there as a police officer. We have been to protests of 20,000 people, 50,000 people, 100,000 people, all peaceful, where the PD consistently stood back, let the peaceful protest move, simply protected everyone. That's what we believe in. That's what we want. That's not the hand we were dealt the last few days. And that's why there had to be also the ability to deal with those who were violent. So it is a balancing act the commissioner can speak to as well. Clearly, you saw yesterday many police officers working to de-escalate and the community coming to the fore. And I think those are very positive trends. We want to deepen those trends. To the 1968 reality, it's not 1968. We're in a whole different reality. I constantly think about what is the right way to engage. And what I've found it is to work with community leaders, who I'm talking to all the time, to figure out whether the best actions we can take to address concerns about each protest. I'm monitoring each and every protest as they're unfolding. When I go somewhere, sometimes it's because I don't like the answers I'm getting, and I go there to see for myself and to meet with the police leaders to talk about exactly what's going on. But it's not 1968. We're in a different environment. I think sometimes when a leader puts themselves in the middle of a situation, it actually exacerbates the situation. It doesn't address it when you're talking about a situation like this where there are different kinds of protesters. If we were dealing with community members, I was speaking to community members in central Brooklyn. I do that all the time throughout my life in public service. I'll do that all day long. But when you're dealing with folks who want disruption, who want to create something that will go on video and that becomes their cause to create a visible disruption, I gotta be smart about how I handle that. So we're conscious of this all the time. But in my conversations with community leaders, my conversations with community activists, people are working to address this problem at the grassroots, and that's what matters. You want to add anything?
Yeah, I'll just say, generally speaking, nothing would make us happier than a large group voicing their opinion safely. That happened yesterday at the Barclays Center. There was a large number of people there for many, many hours. And I would describe it as not contentious at all. There were some police officers there. There was very little hostility at all, if at all. There was also police officers in reserve should things get out of hand, but thankfully it didn't come to that. There's another group in Brooklyn yesterday that I got to give them credit. I think they marched halfway around the world. They walked all over Brooklyn to Manhattan, back. Eventually they met up with the group at the Barclays Center, and all of that was accommodated, and that is generally speaking what we would like to happen. Again, peaceful. But we are also fluid, and we also go by the conditions on the ground. And just yesterday, there were some occurrences that took place. I'll give you a couple examples where we had to either alter a route or, as you said, divide a route for safety reasons. We had one occurrence in Brooklyn where protesters were actually fighting with other protesters, and it got dangerous. We had a very small number during that march I described, where people made their way into the march and threw objects at police officers. That caused some alterations to the route. But again, if we can go in with a surgeon, like a surgeon and a scalpel, and make a correction or make a couple of arrests and allow the larger group to continue, that's what we look to do. And the last one I can think of off the top of my head is we had an occurrence yesterday where people were trying to light fires and burn stores down. And we cannot have a large protest moving towards that. So that's one of the situations you described. So I think I would agree with you that we try to be as flexible as possible, let protests march, exercise their right. That's what we all want. Overwhelmingly, it worked yesterday. We had very minor issues until it got dark yesterday.
Amen.
The next is Juliet from 1010 Wins.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Mayor, and good morning, Commissioner. My first question is for Police Commissioner Shea, and then Mr. Mayor for you. Commissioner, how do you know who these outside agitators are? Who are they? Where are they coming from? Are they identifiable in any way? And Mr. Mayor, you're calling the looting not acceptable and will not be allowed. Is that the strongest language you can muster for people who are destroying cars and property and stealing merchandise in stores?
Juliet, I'm not going to fall into the notion of I have to use a certain language that someone wants to hear bluntly. I'm just going to be real with you. We're not going to allow it. It's illegal. It's wrong. And we're going to go deal with it. These folks have nothing to do with peaceful protest. What they're doing is criminal. So we're going to go deal with it. That's the bottom line. Commissioner, on the other question.
Juliet, on the Deputy Commissioner John Miller's comments yesterday, I think he briefed members of the media yesterday. There are a number of ways that we look at this. We obviously have made some arrests, and we have the intelligence from those arrests, who was arrested. There's also a variety of open source advertisements, if you will, that are put out for the public to see. Some of this is not unique to this environment that we're in right now, unfortunately, where you have outside agitators coming in and trying to rally up people to do some bad things. That's done under the cloak of a greater cause. And again, this is what we're dealing with. It makes it a little bit difficult right now, but we are working with federal partners. We're working with local authorities and just trying to, number one, first and foremost, as we start everyone, make sure that we don't have loss of life or we keep people safe. Then we quickly go to property. What we saw yesterday, we never want to see, and we're going to do everything we can to stop it, whether it's committed by somebody coming from outside or somebody within New York City.
The next is Rosa from the city.
Hi, Mr. Mayor. So you're taking kind of a bad apples frame to violent behavior by police. That was your worst day, and I think by protesters too. But there are more sort of systematic ways to think about how police handle protests. There's a whole body of literature on how the kind of uniforms people wear, whether they wear helmets or not, whether they split crowds, whether they're on bicycles as opposed to bringing SUVs onto the street, and how that influences what happens. And so my question is for you and for Commissioner Shea, like, has the PD changed its model for crowd control in 20 years? What is the philosophy here? Does it need updating, or is this all kind of reactive, kind of individual responses? You get my question?
Yes.
Yeah, no, Rose, it's a great question. I'll start and turn to the Commissioner. There's a really good point you're making, and I appreciate in Nolan's question too, about whether there are parts of the tactics that have the reverse impact. And I would say if we were dealing with consistently peaceful protest, it would be immediately clear that we do not want riot gear. We do not want a large number of police officers. We want a de-escalation approach, just like we are showing in everyday policing. And I know that de-escalation training has had a huge impact on how police encounter a situation, because we've seen the reduction in gun discharges. We've seen the reduction in incidents that turn violent because of de-escalation strategies. And I think you're right also to say, even how police present themselves to the community, it is structural. It's not just about talking about bad apples, I agree with you. The culture of policing has to change. And that's what, at least from the policy level, we've been trying to do with the de-escalation training, with implicit bias training, with neighborhood policing, with a whole set of strategies I think are being felt on the ground in many ways, but we got a lot more to do. I think when you're dealing with a protest that mixes a small number of dedicated, violent protesters with a group of peaceful protesters, it creates a deep complexity that has to be addressed. We see it. Rosa, we see it. We have, I wish we didn't, but we have the examples of the violent protesters. We've seen their instructions to people of how to attack property, of how to bring weaponry with them. We've seen the weaponry that's been recovered. We know there is a small subset doing this, and that changes the whole nature of the police approach. So I think your question leads to a really powerful point. Are we trying to get to the day where it looks very different and when there's a protest and the amount of police, the look of the police, the approach of the police? Absolutely. And I think we were doing that in many ways. Recent protests I've been at, like the climate strike, the police presence was very, very subdued. But this one is just a different reality. Commissioner, you want to speak to it?
Yeah, the short answer is we evolve constantly. From many years ago with our disorder control unit to where we are with strategic response today. Every element of what you said, from uniforms to deployment to bicycles, constantly changes, and it is a fluid situation. I think that many New Yorkers would be surprised at some of the reports that we get on a daily basis within the police department. Forget the current climate of what we're going through right now, or even the months before with the pandemic. On an average day in New York City, you could have 6 protests that go off, and many New Yorkers have no idea about that. And they go off flawlessly. Each one is evaluated daily, and we work with the details that are in front of us. But we have certainly changed over the years and continue to, and always look to learn, but it's changed quite a bit. And we recognize exactly what you said, how we line up, how many officers we have, how are they dressed. All of these things are important, and we look to do the best that we can. I will say, to echo the mayor's words, be careful how you identify here. The earlier question was, what did you know about this earlier? We had some intelligence, but how would it look also balancing out in this difficult time? If we told New Yorkers with this exact situation, don't come out, we think there's going to be problems. And I also don't think that that's anything new, because we've had some of these agitators come out many times before, and I think the media is aware of that. I think ultimately, everyone is accountable for their own decisions here. And I think New Yorkers are wise beyond anyone. And they know that we're in the midst of a protest if something is amiss and if there are people looking to do bad things. I just ask, really I plead with people in that circumstance. The last thing I want you to do is try to dissuade people from coming out, especially now, and voicing your concern. But also you have to be careful and be alert of what's going on around you. And if something doesn't look right, if you think people are planning something, please let the police know, or please make sure you take care of yourself and keep yourself out of that dangerous situation.
Thank you.
The next is Andrew Siff from NBC.
Hi, Mr. Mayor and everyone on the call. Hope you're doing well.
Good. How you doing, Andrew?
I'm okay. We're nearly an hour into this news conference, and to my knowledge, no one has even mentioned the pandemic. So what I'm wondering is, first of all, do you have any concerns about all of these crowds gathering, regardless of the purpose and regardless of the passion, in terms of public health? I'd love it also if one of your public health experts who's on this call could answer as well. How much are you concerned that there will be a rise in COVID cases as a result of all of these crowds? And why have you not made public health statements over the last couple of days reminding people about social distancing?
Yeah. Andrew, excellent questions. We've been talking about this. I don't think we have our public health folks on now, but they can certainly speak to it later. Andrew, this is, I have to say, and I want to just express this openly to everyone. Just a few days ago, what we were entirely focused on, all of us, was one of the greatest challenges this city has ever faced. This pandemic, this painful, horrible crisis, taking the lives of so many New Yorkers. When I was out in central Brooklyn yesterday, maybe I had 15, 20 conversations with just everyday people on the street. Overwhelmingly, people were talking about their concerns about their health, about their kids, about the fact they were running out of money or they had not gotten checks from the federal government. Some people, of course, raised concerns about criminal justice, but most people are dealing with this crisis. They're scared. They're scared for their health. They're scared for their family's health. They're worried that they don't know where things are going with this coronavirus. That hasn't stopped. Andrew, I think the honest truth is we are dealing with, right in the middle of that, another absolutely unforeseen moment that's vast in its scale, that if there had not been the coronavirus now, this last few days would stand out in American history as a painful, profound moment. And you're seeing it happening literally in cities big and small. It looks like entirely all over the country. So I think we've got two almost exact opposite realities, if you will, that are colliding at the same time. Now, the disparities pervade both. Let me hasten to say the disparities, the racism that is inherent in what happened with the pandemic is also inherent in all the concerns running through the policing debate. We've got to address them across the board. We've been trying to for years. We have to do a lot more. But to your central point,